The anniversary trip. Extended narrative. I remember the exact moment I decided to plan my parents' anniversary trip. It was a Tuesday evening in March, and I was sitting in my cramped Seattle apartment, scrolling through old family photos on my phone, while rain drummed against the windows with that persistent Pacific Northwest rhythm that becomes the soundtrack to your thoughts. There was one photo from their wedding day 32 years ago. Mom in her simple white dress with the pearl buttons she'd sewn on herself. Dad with that crooked smile I inherited, along with his stubborn chin and tendency to overthink everything. Both of them looking impossibly young and hopeful in a way that made my chest tighten with a familiar ache. The ache was complicated, layered like sediment in my heart. It wasn't just nostalgia for their youth or sadness about time passing. It was the particular pain that comes from loving people who seem to love everyone except you. Or at least, everyone more than you. I'd spent 30 years perfecting the art of being the easy daughter, the one who never caused problems, who always understood when plans changed or when my needs came second to someone else's crisis. I'd become so good at it that I'd almost convinced myself it was a virtue. But that Tuesday night, staring at their wedding photo while the rain painted abstract patterns on my window, I felt something shift. Maybe it was the way Mom's eyes sparkled in the photo, or how Dad's hand rested so protectively on her waist, or maybe it was just the accumulation of years of feeling like I was watching their love story from the outside, always the audience, never the protagonist in my own family narrative. Whatever it was, I decided that night to do something big, something that would finally earn me a place in the center of their attention. They'd been talking about wanting to travel more, now that Dad was finally considering retirement from his accounting firm where he'd spent 3 decades helping other people organize their financial lives while somehow never quite organizing his own dreams. Mom had mentioned wanting to see the California coast, maybe staying somewhere fancy for once instead of the budget motels and family-owned bed and breakfasts that had marked our family vacations when I was growing up. She'd said it wistfully, the way people talk about winning the lottery, as if luxury was something that happened to other people, not something you could actually plan and save for. I'd been saving money from my graphic design freelance work, living off ramen and coffee, shopping at thrift stores, and convincing myself that my sparse lifestyle was bohemian rather than financially necessary. I told myself I was saving for something important someday, though I'd never defined what that something might be. That Tuesday night, staring at their wedding photo while my laptop glowed with half-finished design projects and my savings account balance taunted me from my banking app, I realized what that something was. It was love. It was proof. It was a demonstration of devotion so elaborate and expensive that they'd have to acknowledge my place in their hearts. It was my bid for belonging, wrapped in the language of generosity. The planning consumed me for weeks in a way that bordered on obsession. I researched every detail with the desperate thoroughness of someone who'd learned that half measures get you forgotten, that love in my family was a competitive sport where the prize went to whoever tried hardest. I spent hours reading travel blogs, comparing hotel reviews, studying restaurant menus, and analyzing weather patterns like I was planning a military operation rather than a romantic getaway. I found the perfect resort in Monterey, perched on dramatic cliffs overlooking the Pacific Ocean, like something from a magazine spread. The Cypress Point Resort had been featured in Travel Plus Leisure as one of the most romantic destinations on the West Coast, with rooms that cost more per night than I usually spent on groceries in a month. But I could picture Mom's face when she saw the ocean view. Could imagine Dad actually relaxing for once instead of checking his phone every 5 minutes or worrying about work emails. The rooms were expensive, the kind of luxury my parents had never allowed themselves in their practical, budget-conscious lives. They were the type of people who bought generic cereal and clipped coupons, who drove their cars until they absolutely couldn't be repaired anymore, who saw expensive dinners and fancy hotels as frivolous indulgences for people who didn't understand the value of money. But maybe that was exactly why they deserved it. Maybe after 32 years of being responsible and practical, they'd earned the right to be frivolous. I booked the flights for the best times, not the cheapest. I chose seats with extra legroom, knowing Dad's back had been bothering him lately. I arranged for a private dinner at Aubergine, a restaurant that had been featured in Bon Appetit and had a waiting list that stretched months into the future. I sweet-talked the hostess, explained it was for my parents' anniversary, and somehow managed to secure a table for their last night. I even researched the weather patterns to make sure they'd pack the right clothes, creating a detailed packing list that I planned to slip into their suitcases. The money came from everywhere. My emergency fund, which I'd been building slowly for 3 years, disappeared in a single afternoon of bookings. The savings I'd been accumulating for a new laptop, my current one had a crack across the screen and a battery that died after 40 minutes, vanished into airline confirmations. I even dipped into the fund I'd been building for a security deposit on a better apartment, the one with actual counter space in the kitchen and windows that didn't face the brick wall of the building next door. I told myself it was worth it, that their joy would be worth the months of ramen and skipped meals ahead of me. I imagined them calling me from the resort, Mom's voice bright with excitement, Dad maybe even admitting he was having fun and that he was grateful for a daughter who understood what they needed better than they did themselves. For once, I'd be the one who made them happy. For once, I'd be the hero of their story instead of the supporting character. I kept the planning secret for 2 months, crafting it like a love letter I was afraid to send. I wanted it to be perfect, wanted their surprise to be complete and overwhelming. I researched their favorite foods, their preferred room temperature, even what kind of pillows they liked. I called the hotel to make sure the room would be stocked with Dad's favorite scotch and Mom's preferred tea. I was creating more than a vacation. I was building a shrine to the relationship I wished we had, the one where my thoughtfulness was valued instead of overlooked, where my efforts were celebrated instead of taken for granted. The confirmation emails filled a folder on my laptop that I'd labeled Anniversary Surprise, with a heart emoji. Flight confirmations, hotel reservations, restaurant bookings, car rental agreements, spa appointments I'd booked for Mom. A golf lesson I'd arranged for Dad, even though he'd never expressed interest in golf, but had mentioned once that he thought it might be relaxing. Each confirmation email represented hours of research and comparison shopping, trying to stretch my budget to cover experiences that would usually cost twice what I was spending. I felt proud of my resourcefulness, proud of the gift I was creating from nothing but love and determination and an increasingly maxed-out credit card. I was like a magician pulling silk scarves from thin air, except the magic was fueled by anxiety and the desperate need to prove my worth through service. During those 2 months of planning, I found myself daydreaming about their reaction. I imagined Mom crying happy tears, Dad speechless with gratitude, both of them finally seeing me as the thoughtful, generous daughter I'd always tried to be. I pictured them telling friends about the amazing surprise I'd planned, bragging about how lucky they were to have a daughter who cared so much. I imagined myself finally earning a place in their stories, becoming someone they were proud to claim. The fantasies were so vivid that I started to believe in them. I convinced myself that this grand gesture would change everything, that it would finally establish the kind of relationship I'd been wanting with them my entire life. I thought love was something you could buy, that devotion was something you could demonstrate through elaborate planning and financial sacrifice. I should have known better. I should have remembered that this was the same family dynamic that had left me feeling invisible for 30 years. But hope is a powerful drug, and I was deeply addicted to the possibility of finally mattering. 3 weeks before the trip, I finally worked up the courage to tell them. I called during their usual Sunday dinner when I knew they'd both be home and relaxed, probably sitting at the kitchen table with the good china mom only used for special occasions, even though it was just the two of them. The ritual of Sunday dinner was one of the few family traditions that had survived my childhood, and I'd been excluded from it for years now. Not deliberately, but simply because I lived across town, and they'd never thought to invite me. Mom answered on the third ring, and I could hear the television in the background. Probably the news with the volume too loud like always. Dad had been getting increasingly hard of hearing but refused to admit it, so everything in their house was turned up to accommodate his pride. "Hi, sweetheart," Mom said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "How are you?" "I'm good, Mom. Is Dad there? I have something to tell you both." There was a pause and I heard her call to Dad. "Bob, Emma's on the phone. She wants to talk to both of us." "Is everything okay?" Dad's voice was closer now, and I could picture them in the kitchen, Mom holding the phone between them like they used to do when I was in college, and money was tight, so long-distance calls were a luxury. "Everything's fine," I said, my voice shaking with nervous excitement. "Actually, everything's better than fine. I have a surprise for you." I took a deep breath, trying to calm the butterflies that had taken up residence in my stomach. "I planned an anniversary trip for you two, to California. Everything's booked and paid for." The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. I checked my phone screen to make sure we were still connected, then heard Mom's sharp intake of breath. "Emma," she said finally, her voice careful and measured in a way that made my stomach drop. That's very thoughtful, honey. But you didn't need to do that." "I wanted to," I said quickly, the words tumbling out in a rush. "It's been 32 years, and you both worked so hard. You deserve something special, something memorable." Dad cleared his throat in that way he did when he was uncomfortable, when he was trying to figure out how to say something without hurting feelings. "We appreciate it, we really do. But next time, maybe ask first? We might have had plans." My heart sank a little, but I pushed forward, determined to make them understand. "I checked your calendar. I made sure it was a weekend when you were both free. I've been planning this for 2 months." "Our calendar?" Mom's voice had that edge I recognized, the one that appeared whenever she felt her independence was being questioned, whenever she thought someone was trying to manage her life without her permission. I called a few times and asked what you were doing, and you said you didn't have anything planned. I wanted it to be a surprise. I thought you'd be excited." Another pause, longer this time. I could hear them breathing, could almost feel them exchanging glances across the kitchen table. "We are excited, honey," Mom said finally, her voice softer now. "Thank you. It's just a lot to process. It's very generous. Too generous," Dad added, and I heard the worry in his voice. "How much did this cost you?" "Don't worry about that," I said, though my credit card statement would tell a different story. "I've been saving up. I wanted to do something special for you. You don't have to take care of us," Mom said gently. "We're supposed to take care of you." But that was the problem, wasn't it? They'd never taken care of me, not in the way I needed. They'd provided food and shelter and college tuition, but they'd never provided the one thing I'd always craved most, the sense that I mattered, that I was essential to their happiness, rather than just convenient to have around. "I know," I said, "but I want to. Let me do this for you." We talked for a few more minutes, with them asking questions about the itinerary, and me eagerly sharing details about the resort and the restaurants and the activities I'd planned. By the end of the call, they seemed genuinely excited, and I felt that familiar surge of satisfaction that came from making them happy. "We'll call you tomorrow with more questions," Mom said. "This is really something, Emma. Thank you." After I hung up, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, feeling proud and anxious and exhausted all at once. I'd done it. I'd planned the perfect surprise, and they were grateful. In 3 weeks, I'd get to watch them enjoy the fruits of my labor, and maybe for once I'd be the daughter they bragged about, instead of the one they worried about. I spent the next 2 weeks in a state of anxious anticipation, checking and rechecking every detail. I created a folder of printouts for them with all the information, complete with a daily itinerary and recommendations for activities. I researched the best spots for photos, knowing Mom would want to document everything for the photo albums she'd been keeping for 40 years. I even looked up the weather forecast obsessively, praying for sunshine and calm seas. The folder was a work of art, if I do say so myself. I'd designed it like a professional travel guide, with photos of the resort and restaurant menus and maps of the area. The cover page had a beautiful shot of the Monterey coastline at sunset, and underneath it, in elegant script font, "Happy 32nd anniversary, Mom and Dad." I'd spent hours on the typography, making sure everything was perfect, professional, worthy of the gift I was giving. I even wrote them a letter to include with the folder, explaining why I'd chosen each element of the trip and what I hoped they'd experience. I told them about the sunset viewing spot I'd marked on the map, about the wine tasting I'd arranged for their first afternoon, about the couples massage I'd booked at the spa. I wrote about how proud I was to be their daughter and how much I wanted them to have this time together to celebrate their love. Reading the letter now, I can see how desperate it was, how much it revealed about my need for their approval and recognition. But at the time, it felt like love in its purest form, the desire to give someone else exactly what they needed, regardless of the cost, to yourself. 2 days before they were supposed to leave, I was working on a logo design for a local bakery, lost in the meditative process of adjusting curves and colors, when my phone buzzed with a text message. I almost ignored it, caught up in the flow of creative work. But something made me glance at the screen. Mom's contact photo appeared, a picture I'd taken of her and Dad at last year's Christmas dinner, both of them laughing at something I couldn't remember now. They looked happy in the photo, relaxed and content in a way that made me wish I could freeze that moment forever. The message was short. "Lauren's coming instead of you. She needs this more." I read it 3 times before the words actually registered. Lauren. My cousin Lauren, who lived in Portland and worked in marketing for a tech company. Lauren, who called my parents maybe twice a year and usually only when she needed something. Money, advice, or a place to stay when she was between apartments. Lauren, who had missed the last 3 family gatherings and never even sent a birthday card. Lauren, who had a stable job and a boyfriend and a new car, and no apparent need for a vacation she hadn't planned or paid for. My hands started shaking as I set down my stylus and stared at the screen. I waited for the follow-up text that would explain this was some kind of misunderstanding, that maybe Lauren was coming along as a third person, and they were asking if I minded the company. Maybe Mom had sent the text to the wrong person. Maybe this was some kind of joke I didn't understand. But no other text came. Just those 11 words floating on my screen, like a death sentence for everything I'd planned and hoped for. I called immediately, my fingers trembling as I found Mom's number in my contacts. She picked up on the 4th ring, and I could hear the defensiveness in her voice before she even said hello. "Hi, Emma. Mom. What do you mean Lauren's coming instead of me?" A sigh that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her chest. "She's going through a hard time with the breakup. She needs to get away." But I planned this. I paid for it. It's my gift to you and Dad. And it's very generous, honey. But Lauren needs this more than you do right now." The words hit me like a physical blow. Lauren needed this more than I did. Lauren, who had never planned a surprise for my parents in her life. Lauren, who couldn't even be bothered to call them on their birthdays. Lauren, who had been dating the same guy for 2 years and had apparently just broken up with him, needed my anniversary gift more than I did. "I don't understand," I said, my voice smaller than I intended. "What about me? I planned this whole thing. I was looking forward to spending time with you both." "You'll have other opportunities," Mom said dismissively. "Lauren is really struggling right now. She needs family support." "I'm family too," I said, and I hated how pathetic I sounded. "I'm your daughter. Don't make this about you," Mom said, and something in her tone made me freeze. It was sharp, impatient, like I was being unreasonable for having feelings about my own gift being redistributed to someone else. "This is about doing what's right for someone who's in pain. What about my pain?" I wanted to ask, but I knew it wouldn't matter. My pain had never mattered in this family. My needs had always been secondary to everyone else's emergencies. My feelings always less important than keeping peace or helping someone else through a crisis. I wanted to argue. I wanted to explain how much time I'd spent planning, how much money I'd saved, how much this meant to me. I wanted to ask why Lauren's breakup trumped my desire to spend time with my parents, why her emotional needs were more valid than mine. I wanted to demand to know when exactly I'd become expendable in my own family. But something in Mom's voice told me none of that would matter. My feelings, my efforts, my financial sacrifice, none of it was as important as whatever Lauren needed. I was the convenient daughter, the one who could be counted on to understand and accommodate and swallow disappointment without complaint. "I have to go," I said quietly. "Don't be dramatic," Mom replied, as if my hurt feelings were just another inconvenience to be managed. "We can plan something else sometime. Maybe a nice dinner or a day trip. Sometime. Maybe." The words of people who had no intention of following through. The language of polite dismissal wrapped in the pretense of future consideration. I hung up and sat in the silence of my apartment, feeling like I'd been punched in the chest. The logo design stared back at me from my computer screen, cheerful and innocent. A smiling cupcake with pink frosting and rainbow sprinkles. It was a reminder of the normal life I'd been living just minutes ago, before everything shifted and revealed the truth about my place in my family's hierarchy. My phone buzzed with a few more texts from Mom, but I didn't read them. I couldn't. I was too busy trying to process what had just happened. Too busy trying to understand how a gift I'd planned, with so much love and care, could be casually redistributed, like it was nothing more than a restaurant reservation that could be transferred to someone else. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at nothing, trying to make sense of the conversation I'd just had. My parents had taken my gift, my time, my money, my love, and given it to someone else because she needed it more. They'd erased me from my own generous gesture, and then told me not to make it about me. But it was about me. It was about the fact that I'd spent 2 months planning every detail, that I'd emptied my savings account, that I'd been looking forward to spending time with them and watching them enjoy something I'd created for them. It was about the fact that I'd been pushed aside again, my feelings dismissed again, my needs considered less important than someone else's again. That's when I realized what I had to do. I opened my laptop and began pulling up confirmation emails, my hands steadier now that I had a purpose. Flight reservations, hotel bookings, restaurant confirmations, car rental agreements, spa appointments, golf lessons. Everything was in my name, paid for with my credit cards, secured with my personal information. I had created this entire experience from nothing, and apparently, that gave me the power to uncreate it. I started with the airline. Their website made it easy enough. A few clicks through the Manage My Booking section, and the reservation was canceled. I felt a strange satisfaction watching the confirmation disappear from my screen, replaced by a cancellation notice and a refund processing message. The money wouldn't be back in my account for several days, but the booking was gone, erased as easily as my parents had erased me. Then the hotel. The Cypress Point Resort's online portal was more complicated, requiring me to call out during business hours to cancel. I found myself on hold for 20 minutes, listening to classical music while I stared out my window at the Seattle skyline, gray and drizzly, and somehow perfect for my mood. When the reservation agent finally picked up, I explained that I needed to cancel my booking. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said, her voice professionally sympathetic. "Is there anything we can do to help you reschedule?" "No," I said simply. "I just need to cancel everything." "May I ask the reason for the cancellation? We might be able to offer you a credit for future use." I almost laughed. The people I booked it for decided they'd rather give it to someone else. There was a pause. "I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand." "Neither do I," I said. "But I need to cancel everything. The room, the dinner reservation, the spa appointments, all of it." The agent was efficient and professional, walking me through the cancellation process without asking more questions. I could hear her typing, presumably updating their system to reflect that the romantic anniversary getaway I'd planned so carefully would not be happening. The private dinner at Aubergine was next. I'd had to call in favors to get that reservation, explaining to the hostess that it was for my parents' anniversary and that I wanted to give them something special. Now I had to call back and cancel, explaining to the same hostess that plans had changed. "Oh no," she said when I explained. "I remember you. You were so excited about surprising your parents." "What happened?" "They decided to give the trip to someone else," I said, the words feeling strange and foreign in my mouth. "They gave away your gift." "Apparently. That's awful. I'm so sorry." Her sympathy felt genuine, and it made me realize how starved I'd been for someone to acknowledge that what had happened to me was actually wrong, that my feelings were valid, and my hurt was justified. The car rental was the easiest to cancel. Just a few clicks on their website and the reservation was gone. I saved the spa appointments for last, partly because I knew they'd be the most disappointed. I'd specifically requested their best massage therapist, explained that it was for an anniversary celebration, even paid extra for champagne and strawberries to be waiting in the treatment room. "I'm so sorry to hear about the cancellation," the spa coordinator said when I called. "Your parents would have loved the couple's package. Is there anything else we can do?" "No," I said, "but thank you for asking." With each cancellation, I felt something shifting inside me. Not sadness exactly, but a kind of clarity. I was watching my own generosity being erased, line by line, confirmation by confirmation. It should have felt destructive, but instead it felt like archaeology, uncovering something that had been buried under months of planning and hope and desperate need for recognition. When I was done, I sat back and looked at the folder full of cancellation confirmations. My inbox was full of reservation-canceled emails, each one representing hours of research and planning, that had been dismissed with a single text message. My phone had been buzzing intermittently with more texts from Mom, but I hadn't looked at them. I didn't need to. I could imagine what they said. More explanations about Lauren's needs, more dismissals of my feelings, more requests for me to be understanding and accommodating. Instead, I opened a new email and began attaching the cancellation confirmations. Flight canceled, hotel canceled, dinner canceled, car rental canceled, spa appointments canceled, golf lesson canceled. I attached them all without commentary, without explanation, without the kind of emotional processing that had characterized every other interaction, I'd had with my parents. I didn't write a message. I didn't explain my actions or justify my decision or ask for understanding. I just sent the receipts and then closed my laptop, feeling like I'd completed some kind of ritual I didn't fully understand, but knew was necessary. The silence that followed was different from the silence after Mom's text. This was the silence of completion, of a decision made and executed without second-guessing or regret. I had given them a gift, and they had given it to someone else, so I had taken it back. It was that simple. My phone started ringing within minutes. Mom's contact photo appeared on the screen. Then Dad's. Then Mom's again. I let them all go to voicemail, not because I was angry anymore, but because I knew that whatever they had to say would be designed to make me feel guilty for disappointing them, for not being understanding enough, for making their lives more difficult. I made myself tea and sat by my window, watching the Seattle drizzle turn the streets shiny and reflective. The city looked different somehow, like I was seeing it from a new angle, like someone had adjusted the contrast and suddenly everything was clearer. The buildings seemed sharper, the colors more vivid, the movement of cars and people more purposeful. I thought about Lauren, probably getting ready for a free vacation she hadn't planned or paid for. I wondered if she felt guilty about accepting my gift, or if she even knew it had been my gift in the first place. I wondered if my parents had told her about the months of planning I'd done, about the money I'd spent, about the folder full of information I'd prepared. Probably not. It was easier to frame it as their generous gesture, their thoughtful gift to a family member in need. It was easier to erase my contribution and take credit for my love. The voicemails piled up over the next hour. I could see the notification numbers climbing. 7, then 9, then 12. I didn't listen to them. I didn't need to hear their anger, or their justifications, or their attempts to make me feel guilty for setting a boundary. I had said everything I needed to say through those cancellation confirmations. When the calls finally stopped, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years of family interactions. Peace. Not the peace of resolution, but the peace of clarity. I had been planning that trip for 2 people who would give away my efforts without a second thought, who would dismiss my feelings without consideration, who would ask me to be understanding when they had shown me no understanding at all. I had been saving money for people who valued my cousin's temporary emotional needs over my permanent emotional needs. I had been loving people who saw my love as a commodity, to be redistributed to whoever seemed to need it more at any given moment. My phone buzzed with a text from Dad. "Call us. We need to talk." I stared at the message for a long time, thinking about all the conversations we'd had over the years, where I'd been the one needing to talk, needing to be heard, needing to matter. Those conversations had always ended the same way, with me being told to be more understanding, more flexible, more willing to put everyone else's needs before my own. I thought about the pattern we'd established over 3 decades. I give, they take, I adjust, they dismiss, I accommodate, they expect. It was a dance we'd been dancing for so long that none of us questioned the steps anymore. But I was tired of dancing. I was tired of being the one who always had to adjust, who always had to understand, who always had to be okay with being erased. I typed my response carefully, reading it several times before hitting send. "I planned this for family. You made it clear I'm not part of that." It was the most honest thing I'd said to them in years. Maybe ever. I'd spent my entire life trying to earn my place in their family, trying to prove my worth through service and sacrifice and endless accommodation. But you can't earn something that should be freely given. You can't prove your way into unconditional love. Then I turned off my phone and went to bed, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Proud of myself, not for the elaborate trip I'd planned, not for the money I'd spent, not for the thoughtfulness I'd shown. I was proud of myself for finally saying no, for finally choosing myself over everyone else's comfort, for finally acknowledging that my feelings mattered too. I slept better that night than I had in months, and when I woke up the next morning, the world looked different. The sun was streaming through my apartment windows, and I could hear birds singing in the tree outside my bedroom. It was the first morning in weeks that I hadn't woken up anxious about trip details or excited about my parents' upcoming surprise. Instead, I woke up feeling like myself, not the accommodating daughter, not the generous gift giver, not the understanding family member who always put everyone else first. Just me, Emma, a 30-year-old woman who had finally learned that love shouldn't require constant proof, that family shouldn't require constant sacrifice, that belonging shouldn't require constant erasure of yourself. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, looking at the folder of printed itineraries I'd prepared for my parents. It was still sitting there, a monument to my misguided efforts to buy love through elaborate gestures. The cover page had a photo of the Monterey Resort at sunset, and underneath it, in my careful handwriting, "Happy 32nd anniversary, Mom and Dad." I'd spent hours on that folder, making sure every detail was perfect, every recommendation thoughtful, every piece of information useful. I'd included restaurant reviews, weather forecasts, maps of scenic drives, and a detailed daily schedule that would have made their trip effortless and magical. Now it just looked sad, like a love letter that had been returned to sender. I threw the folder in the trash and opened my laptop. The design project I'd been working on, the cheerful bakery logo with the smiling cupcake, was still there, waiting for my attention. I spent the morning losing myself in creative work, adjusting colors and fonts, finding satisfaction in the simple act of making something beautiful without any expectation of recognition or reward. When I looked up, it was past noon, and I realized I hadn't thought about the canceled trip, or my parents' reaction, or Lauren's undeserved vacation for hours. I'd been fully present in my own life, focused on my own work, caring for my own needs. It was a revelation. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in months. I went for a walk just for the pleasure of it, not to run errands or meet someone or accomplish anything specific, but simply to move through the world and observe it without agenda. I walked through the Pike Place Market, watching tourists take pictures of the fish throwers, listening to street musicians play covers of songs I recognized, breathing in the smell of fresh flowers and coffee and the salt air from Elliott Bay. I bought myself a small bouquet of daffodils, bright yellow flowers that seemed to capture the sunshine I was feeling inside. It was the kind of impulsive purchase I usually talked myself out of, the kind of small luxury I would have convinced myself I didn't need. But that day, I needed them. I needed the reminder that I was allowed to buy myself beautiful things, that I was allowed to spend money on my own happiness, that I was allowed to be my own priority. The flowers sat on my kitchen counter like a small, bright reminder of my newfound freedom. They were just flowers, but they represented something larger, the permission I'd finally given myself to matter, to have needs, to take up space in my own life. My phone had been off since the previous evening, but I finally turned it on as I was making dinner. The notifications flooded in like a dam had burst. Missed calls, voicemails, text messages, even a few emails. I scrolled through them with the detachment of someone reading news from a foreign country. The anger in my parents' messages was palpable, but it felt distant, like it belonged to someone else's life. Someone else's problem. Dad's texts were short and direct, increasingly frustrated. "This is ridiculous. You're being childish. Call us immediately. We need to talk about this. You can't just ignore us." Mom's messages were longer, more emotional, cycling through different tactics. "I can't believe you would do this. You're hurting us over nothing. This isn't like you. We raised you better than this. Lauren is devastated. How could you be so selfish? But that last word, selfish, made me pause. Selfish. I had spent my entire life being unselfish, accommodating, understanding, flexible. I had given away my time, my money, my energy, my needs, my feelings, my dreams, always in service of someone else's comfort or happiness. And the first time I chose myself, the first time I said no to being erased, I was selfish. Maybe I was selfish. Maybe after 30 years of selflessness, I had earned the right to be selfish. Maybe selfishness was just another word for self-respect, for knowing your own worth, for refusing to be treated as less important than everyone else. I made myself a simple dinner, pasta with vegetables and herbs from the small garden I'd started on my fire escape. Nothing fancy, nothing Instagram-worthy. Just nourishing food that I'd prepared for myself with care and attention. I ate it slowly, tasting every bite, grateful for the simple pleasure of a meal I'd made for my own enjoyment. Later that evening, I called my friend Sarah, who lived in San Francisco and had been my roommate in college. We'd been friends for over a decade, but I realized I hadn't talked to her in months. I'd been so consumed with family drama and work and the endless project of trying to earn love that I'd neglected the relationships that actually nourished me. "Emma," she said when she picked up, her voice warm and familiar. "I was just thinking about you. How are you? How's the family?" I told her everything. The months of planning, the expensive bookings, the text about Lauren, my decision to cancel everything. She listened without interrupting, making small sounds of understanding and sympathy and, occasionally, outrage on my behalf. "Holy shit," she said when I finished. That's actually kind of amazing." "Amazing? You stood up for yourself. You set a boundary. Do you know how rare that is? Do you know how hard that is? I hadn't thought of it that way. I just got angry." "No, you got clear. There's a difference. Anger is reactive. What you did was proactive."